So that gets us, I think, to solutions. And I want to focus on that for around 15 minutes and then get to questions from folks in the audience. So let's talk about solutions. You talked a little bit about the need for public-private cooperation, and also for the private sector to, I guess one term would be, don't let greed make your decisions for you when it comes to vis-a-vis foreign investment, particularly in China. You don't call for, by the way, decoupling for China. I think call rebalancing, which I think is a very good way of thinking about it. When do you address that? Well, let's TikTok through some unintended solution.
So the question here, so to put an answer to the question is what?
Public-private partnership I think is necessary to address what Mike just laid out. That's what we're doing.
Well, so one of the other, so the critical infrastructure is one of the biggest problems. The other enormous problem is the defense industrial base, 300,000 companies that make the gear, that the technology that the Pentagon uses. So these are private sector companies that want to be involved in making money and enhancing their quarterly earnings. And that's the way this profit motive is at the heart of the American success in the world, that we are a fluent and successful country, partly because our private sector is laser focused on how do we make more money each quarter. But what they're not willing to do is to allow the Pentagon to inspect their IT systems, to look for foreign penetration. And they're not willing to allow the Pentagon even to hire third-party auditors like Mandiant or CrowdStrike to inspect their systems. As a result, the Chinese have stolen massive amounts of military technology from the defense industrial base. There must be a way to create a system where Mandiant, Cyber, CrowdStrike, and others have the threat information given to them by the different government agencies and can scan their clients, the private sector, to identify the problems, to help their private sector clients identify immediate potential problems in their systems. That would sidestep the problem of, the federal government, the big bad boys, are telling you what to do. If we could create a hybrid system where we cooperated and we defended each other's interests. Government defended its interest for cybersecurity, the private sector defended its interest to make money, so we need some creative thinking in terms of how do we accomplish a national goal without violating the gap between the public and private sector. Our sheer openness, our sheer pluralism is one of the reasons why we're so vulnerable. We believe in checks and balances, and having no one really being in charge of telling people what they can do with their data. So one of the questions we get from people when we talk about this is, are we going to have to give up our rights as Americans to solve this problem? Are you going to tell us we have to obey some great bureaucrat in Washington? Are we going to have to give up our rights? So this is very sensitive. How can we create win-win solutions where we defend our cybersecurity, private sector continues to be able to make money? This is what we call for. Look, we need ways to do that.
Well, I mean, one term for it is enlightened self-interest. Another is a focus on the common good and the common ground. Cooperation is something we are in short supply of, particularly. And yet, as you point out, there were a number of bipartisan pieces of legislation that are dealt with this, that, from the, under the Biden administration, the CHIPS Act in particular, took it seriously. Mike, tell us about some of the legislation you all are encouraging Congress to pass. And then I also, given that you're a former member of the military, proposed cyber force based on the Coast Guard, which I thought was kind of interesting. Tell us about that.
So first of all, from a legislative perspective, it's been argued that this would be more of an executive branch action, much in the same way as after 9/11 we stood up the Department of Homeland Security because shoes were bad. We had to wage a war on shoes going over the airport. So we had the Department of Homeland Security moving forward. And everyone thought, in general, that's a good thing. We need to have a government agency, a secretary, cabinet-level agency that's responsible for defending the homeland. Well, cyberspace affects everything. Cyberspace reaches across the very broad spectrum, not just of the executive branch, but the broad spectrum of society, yet we do not have a cabinet-level secretary or agency, government department, that's responsible for administering cybersecurity. But it goes beyond cybersecurity. What we put forth is not just a Department of Cybersecurity, but writ large, a Department of Digital Services. And the Department of Digital Services would be headed by what is now the Office of the National Cyber Director, as the secretary or as the cabinet level secretary. Within the Department of Digital Services, we recommend having the critical or the cybersecurity and critical cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency. CISA, yeah, and then also the different elements within the federal government that all have cyber in their name. So the different cyber divisions, not the ones that are defending their network, but the ones that are administering things. And so the SEC recently put out a cyber regulation for all publicly traded companies that they have to report cyber incidents within 24 or within 72 hours. They have to report payment of ransomware within 24 hours. And then they also have to have cybersecurity governance and all these different things. Well, the SEC has a regulation. The TSA has a regulation. NYDFS has a regulation. And we've got 50 different state regulations that deal with breach notifications. We've got 9 state regulations that deal with data privacy. Yet we still do not have a federal data privacy regulation. We still do not have a federal agency that's overall responsible for cybersecurity.
No one is in charge.
And so, in fact, we're doing 50 state, when it's borderless problems.
And that's we've got the Department of Commerce that's responsible for putting out standards and guidance that touches every company within the United States, because the cybersecurity framework, if you're in the defense industrial base, the 800 TAC 171 responsibilities, the 100 TAC controls for dealing with controlled unclassified information. Now, every company, all those 300,000 companies, have to ensure that they're compliant with. And so NIST from the Department of Commerce is telling defense industrial based companies what are the controls that they need to put in place to ensure that they are protecting military secrets. That's what we're saying. This is the structure that we have. So we're saying, well, why have all of these different government agencies when you can house it under one cabinet level secretary that's overall responsible? But then we go a step further. If you just have someone who is regulatory, someone who is just telling companies and telling government agencies what to do, how effective is that? You need to have something with a little bit more teeth. And so we recommend establishing a 7th service. And the 7th service is the United States Cyber Force. We have a Space Force, we call it a Cyber Force. The Cyber Force would be modeled after the Coast Guard. And the reason we did this is because currently all of our cyber mission force, meaning all of the organizations or all of the military elements beneath U.S., they're operating under Title 10, Title 10 United States Code, which are military operations, meaning they conduct valid military operations against valid military targets. Well, what about law enforcement? Well, that's the FBI. What if it's intelligence? Well, that's the CIA, the NSA, the counterintelligence community. But none of them actually talk to each other. None of them actually work together effectively. So if you have a ransomware actor that's operating at the behest or the direction of Russian FSB, what is that? Well, if they conduct a military attack, meaning a kinetic attack against the United States, that's a military act by a nation state, but it's an intelligence organization. Or it's a proxy that's conducting a criminal activity at the behest of. This gray area is where our adversary lives. Yeah. We have no way to defend against it.
Basically, as one of our people we quote says that the United States government is not organized for the digital era. The internet has exploded, and the U.S. government structure and capabilities have not kept pace.
Well, it's a quarter century problem.
This isn't new by any means. And so our recommendation is for the Cyber Force, we would model it after the Coast Guard. Reason being, what does the Coast Guard do? Well, it's this kind of nebulous organization. It's kind of law enforcement, kind of intelligence, kind of military. The United States Coast Guard is at all times a part of the Department of the Navy, meaning it operates under Title 10 authorities. We can deploy Coast Guard cutters under a Navy admiral in 7th or in 5th Fleet in the Middle East, for instance, to conduct operations in the Arabian Gulf or in the South China Sea. They're a military organization. Well, they also have law enforcement authorities under Title 18. They can board ships, they can arrest people, they can do drug enforcement. They have as law enforcement authorities. Under Executive Order 1203, they're also a part of the intelligence community, meaning they're deriving their authorities to conduct intelligence operations directly from the president, not from the DoD, not from DHS. They're also a part of DHS, so they operate under Title 6, which are DHS authorities. They also have Title 14, which are Coast Guard authorities. And so they derive all these different authorities. They're able to operate in this gray zone because that's what we need them to do.
That's fascinating.
And so in order for a Coast Guardsman to conduct their operations effectively against drug traffickers, for instance, they need to be at all times military, they need to be intelligence community, they need to be law enforcement, they need to have their own authorities. And oh, by the way, the Coast Guard can board any vessel in the continental United States, meaning our waters, and they can take it over. That's part of their authorities. So what's the difference between a Coast Guardsman doing that or a cyber force operator going to a virtual private server in Florida that we know Russian cyber actors are utilizing as a hot point to penetrate critical infrastructure and saying, we are coming over and we are shutting you down for a period of time because this is being used to target and harm Americans. That authority exists in the Coast Guard in the maritime domain, yet we have nothing similar in cyberspace, but we could.
It's a fascinating parallel in terms of the variable sort of ability to operate in gray zone that the Coast Guard presents. That's fascinating. Thank you for clarifying that. It's really interesting. And the audience.